calling this special session based on a letter that was submitted to us by the governor. So if we could then I would like to ask Speaker Pangilinan if you can lead us in prayer.
Si Deus masi, panogi fan todo den fan tekung. Inani tata la hinya dan Espiritu Santo. Amen. Deus tata. Antes din tutun, zahuna gineni minago mami todo nini na imu gimapus na sakan. Na una fan safu ham todo I familian mami dan ingonai dan mami. Ingagagaw na continua talo muna liam ni matamu. Una tunguam iminagem I corazon mo. Zaun fa nuiam iminaulik ititsomu. Eno ingagagaw ginin hami todos. Ingagagaw esti para hami, para I tautoguahan, dan todo lokoi intero mundo siya. Gwini gitano ni tauto ni man spipia pas. Fa nui zon na ini kanay mo. Zon gia zon pipit mona ni manu ni sinya man soda igonaiza dan in pas. Ingagagaw lokwe na una siguro na insegui titsomu gwini. Da todo insegui gini para iminaulig itaw mo da para bin setbiho da nililuksyon mo gwin gitano. Eno ingagagaw gininas na namu da nilay mo. Por favor, sa namasi. Inanitata lahinya dan Espiritu Santo. Amen.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Senator Duenas if he can lead us in the recitation of the Inifresi?
Inifresi. Inimastakilu gihinosoko. Imastakilum gikurasonu. Dan imas figo na nagsisanadu. Maisadu para beho preteni. Zanu defendi. Gihinengi. Ikutura. Ilengwahi. Iairi. Ihanu. Zanitanu tsumoro. Nide shako. Idiretsu. Ginazu. Stata. Estiu eftima. Gihiro Biblia. Zani bandarahu. Ibandarangwaha.
And can Senator Munya Barnes lead us in the singing of the Guam hymn in Chamorro? And Frank Agun, if you can lead us in the national anthem. Thank you very much. The clerks, please take roll call.
Senator Tom Ada. Senator Tony Ada. Senator Uggan. Vice Speaker Cruz. Senator Duenas. Senator Limtiaco. Senator McCready. Senator Morrison. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Rodriguez. Senator San Nicolas. Speaker Wampat.
Present.
Senator Yamashita. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Senator Respicio, you call for the approval of the Legislative Journal.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and colleagues. I move that we approve the Legislative Journal dated September 18, 2013, the fifth special session. We approve that subject to correction.
On the motion without any objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I move that any communications and petitions relative to this sixth special session that be appended to today's session journal.
Hearing objections, so ordered.
I move that any messages from Imagalahan, Guahan, which there is, relative to this call to a sixth special session be appended to today's session journal.
Hearing objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, and like as we've done in the past, I move that we waive the reading of reports of standing committees, item 11, reports of select committees, as well as the readings of any bills or resolutions that are introduced, as this is a special session and we can only entertain the matter to which the governor called us into. So I move that items 10, 11, and 12 of this special session agenda be waived.
Hearing objections, so ordered.
And Madam Speaker, on item 13, I have no motions relative to this special session. So I move that under legislative concurrence, we certainly can entertain any legislative concurrence outside of the special session as well as consent calendar. And on the second reading file, I just ask that the clerk take Bill 250-32 and number that Bill 1-6S.
Senator, before we do that, can you have a motion to excuse the Vice Speaker?
I'm sorry, Madam Speaker and colleagues. I move that we excuse the Vice Speaker from today's special session.
And the motion without any objections, so ordered.
Yeah, and just so for purposes of our records, that Bill 250-32, which is in the second reading file, that the clerk reference that as Bill 1-6S. That's how we would do it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so thank
So-
you, Madam Speaker.
So that, okay, so that takes us then to the second reading file, which is Bill 250-32. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, wait, where is it? Oh. One. Okay, I'm sorry. So it is 1-6S. And so it's open now. Whoever's going to make the motion, Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill 1-S, formerly
6S.
1-6, I'm sorry, S, formerly Bill 250-32 in the second reading.
Okay, and you will discuss it.
Yes.
Okay, so you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, first of all, I'd like to thank the Governor for calling us into session to deal with this measure. I also want to thank Majority Leader Respicio and Senator Chris Duenas for co-sponsoring this legislation with me. What this legislation really is about, Madam Speaker, is pretty simple. We've had an existing statute that this body has authorized the Guam Memorial Hospital to go out and take out a loan We've recently, in this term, have authorized them to go on and expand the borrowing by using compact impact funds to refinance this $25 million loan. And the hope here was that after this refinancing, the hospital would net out about a little bit over $14 million to pay off its existing debts. And so in the process of moving this loan forward, there was a small glitch, a hiccup between the government of Guam and the lender that was awarded this refinancing from the Guam Memorial Hospital. And I have here that I hope that they have circulated to the members here are copies of a 6-point email from GIDA, from Mr. Lester Carlson, that really points out why it was important for us to address this issue that has come up, and why I had to introduce Bill 250-32. We've received a copy of, and it should be attached here as well, a letter from the Attorney General's office dated November 24th.
Senator, maybe before you proceed, is that you're mentioning some of these letters, and if you want it then to be a part of the journal, then please
Yes.
state so, so that, and then the copies will be, we'll make sure that the clerks have them, and they'll be appended to
Yes.
the journal. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, so these documents that I'm referencing, I would like to request that be added to our legislative journal. But this December 24th memo that we received a copy of was from the Attorney General's office to the attorneys of the lender, in this case, for the Guam Memorial Hospital refinancing. And basically, what it's saying here is that our existing statute, which waives sovereign immunity, does not cover attorney's fees or any related costs that would result in this in any lawsuit, which may come up in the performance of this agreement, and this agreement being the loan that the Guam Memorial Hospital is refinancing. And so we can see from this document that the Attorney General's office was gracious enough to advise the lender that they would still move forward in signing off on these loan documents, but they would include a legal proviso that indicated that attorney's fees and related costs were not covered. And so this issue is somewhat a reversal of policy that has come out of the Attorney General's office. We know that in 2010 there was a loan for the Guam Waterworks Authority, a $30 million loan. And in that case, it was the interpretation of the Attorney General at that time that attorney's fees, when the government has waived sovereign immunity, that the interpretation back then was that attorney's fees and related costs were also covered in that waiver of sovereign immunity. However, the Attorney General's office has had time to review what it is that those documents were, and now has come up with the interpretation that they would not move forward unless they attach this legal proviso. And that's where the glitch or the hiccup has occurred, in that the lender now is not amenable to this proviso. And so the last resort here, even after they've been trying to go through this with GIDA, the last resort here is to amend current statute for this loan that they are negotiating with. And so that's in a nutshell what this piece of legislation does. And before we do move forward, though, Madam Speaker, in speaking to some of our colleagues here, there was a concern that when we now include this language about including attorney's fees and related costs, that we're opening it up to suits from people who are not interested parties of this agreement, being the loan. And so we've talked to GIDA. They've come back to us and said they've talked to the lender, and that they were okay and agreeable to an amendment that I'd like to proffer now at this time. And it's on page 1, line 9. After related cost, we add of the lender, And so it will read from page 9, immunity is also waived as to the award of attorney fees and related cost of the lender in connection with any, and this is line 10 now, with any suit brought, and an amendment I'd like to add, by the lender to enforce any right or obligation incurred under, and so forth and so on. And so what this does now, Madam Speaker, is that it limits it to that this waiver of sovereign immunity that we have already granted in current statute. Now we expand it to attorney's fees and related costs is only we're waiving it only for the lender. In this case, the one who was awarded this refinancing for the loan for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And so on those amendments, Madam Speaker, if we can address that for now.
On the amendment, and all of you should have a copy of the bill, and on line 9, then after the word cost, add the words of the lender, and then on line 10, after the word brought by, add the words by the lender. So on the amendment, is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? There being none, so no, before I hit it, is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? I know you're, on the two amendments is of the lender and then by the lender. No objections? So ordered. Senator, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, the urgency of this matter here is that we've known that it's been several months that we have actually passed the law that authorizes the expanded borrowing ability of the hospital. And, they've been doing what they need to do. GIDA, Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, has been doing what they need to do to get this loan moving forward. However, as I mentioned earlier, with this small glitch that has occurred, it has jeopardized really the functions of our hospital. We know that for a long time now that the largest debt that the hospital owes is to Perry Point. And sometime last year, Perry Point, the collection arm of Perry Point, has been the federal government. And we've known that federal funds were garnished, Medicare reimbursements were garnished, and it really put it impacted negatively the hospital a great deal. And so since then, we've had that garnishments lifted. However, from the assurances that the hospital management has been giving to Perry Point, to the other vendors, is that they're working really hard to get this loan processed and move forward. However, there was one vendor who had basically put a final ultimatum on the hospital, and this is their software provider, that indicated to them that if their debt is not paid by January 22nd, then they will not grant any more extensions, and that they would terminate the licenses to use those softwares for the hospital. And so that has been a real big problem. We know that our local vendors, doctors and pharmaceuticals here on Guam, they've been very patient, and we've been telling them that the legislature has responded and is going to make sure that those back billings, those debts that have been accruing are going to be paid. So we want to make sure that all of these are taken care of. And also, I know that there was some question about whether this now is we're doing a new loan for the hospital. It's not a new loan. I want to make that very clear. This is a loan authorization that this body has already authorized last year, several months ago, and that I know and I'm confident that the hospital administration and management has been doing what they could to really to keep the hospital afloat. And so they've said, and they've said many times that this debt is what threatens the hospital. And, they needed the help. We provided that help. The legislature, in collaboration with the government, provided that help to get this debts paid off. And, they gave us assurances, and we have been working very closely with them in ensuring that that from this point on that things start to improve at the hospital. And so, Madam Speaker, I ask our colleagues to please support this measure so that once and for all we can get this loan moving forward. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motions, anyone would like to speak? Yes, on the bill now, on the main motion. Senator Agun, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly stand in support of the amended Bill 1-6S. You know, I just inquired in reference to when Public Law 32-43 was enacted into law, and it was back in July. And even back then, there were some serious questions raised about the need for the additional $12 to $15 million so that it can provide financing support to GMH. And then I look at the timeline, and we're talking about 6 months later, and I just want to share a concern about some of the I guess comments that were sent to the legislature in regards to the importance and the timeliness of this legislation. And don't get me mistaken, because in this case, I have supported previous legislation and subsequent legislation to the enactment of Public Law 32-43, as it would provide financing support to GMH. But when the letter says the legislature will risk the lives of thousands of Guamanians, and then it also goes forward and says every day that goes without obviously providing some additional support, the delay in implementing this financing option also could risk critical services being suspended, such as the hospital's health records software. Both vendors are expecting their overdue payments by the end of the month. I understand the time constraints. I understand the importance of getting the financing, the additional finances to GMH, so that they can take care of prior year obligations. But, Madam Speaker, I have to come to the defense of this body. Because if you recall, even in the budget for this fiscal year, extensive flexibility, authorization, and transfer authority has been extended to the chief executive. So if some of these issues could possibly lead to jeopardizing or risking the lives of our people out there in providing health care at GMH, if some of these lack of immediate financial support may lead to the garnishment of GMH Medicare funds, may lead to a program or a critical service being suspended, then to me, there's already a mechanism in place that would allow this chief executive to utilize the flexibility provided in this fiscal year's budget. And I think that perhaps what we should be considering is allowing for reimbursement. If the chief executive says from the general fund, I'm going to transfer based on the authority provided here, $5 million to take care of an outstanding obligation, then $5 million will be transferred, and then perhaps the legislation that we should be considering is giving him that reimbursement out of the proceeds of the loan, so that at least he utilizes the tools that are already existent in public law that this body has concurred with and has supported in terms of providing the chief executive all the flexibility so that funds can be identified and eventually transferred. I just, Madam Speaker, wanted to express that concern, because when we look at this and we look at the sense of urgency in terms of passing this, if that's what it's going to take to get the additional $12 or $15 million, and I say that because a part of this whole scheme, borrowing scheme, is making sure that the original loan that was authorized a few years ago would be refinanced. But if passing this would allow for the immediate access of these proceeds from the lending institution also over to GMH so that they can address some of these concerns, then I'm all for that. But I'm not going to stand here and say this body has not, over the course of its budgetary process, provided the flexibility to the executive branch to utilize the transfer authority to identify financial resources so that these things that are highlighted in the letter would not happen. Because, Madam Speaker, I'm of the understanding that if a request out of the proceeds from these loans, if it were consummated prior in terms of the transfer, if there's a request for reimbursement out of the proceeds of this loan, I would not object to that. Absolutely not, if the resources are being taken initially out of the budget authorization that is already provided. So I just wanted to share that concern, because I believe that by virtue of calling us into special session, there's a recognition that GMH needs the money yesterday, or needed the funds yesterday so that they can meet some of these outstanding obligations. If that's the case, then there already are tools and mechanisms in place within this fiscal year's budget that will provide that support, at least in the interim, until this particular legislation is enacted or any subsequent legislation is enacted. Because this body has always stepped forward when in fact there's a need to infuse some additional financial resources, whether it be a loan, whether it be taking proceeds, tax proceeds from a particular activity in Guam and redirecting that specifically over to GMH so that GMH would not be without the necessary funds to continue their operations and to meet some of their vendor obligations, or even when it's looking prospectively. One of our colleagues, and we passed it a little earlier or latter part of last year, where taxes, withholding taxes and any taxes generated from the medical facility that will be completed shortly, that any anticipated additional taxes generated from that institution would directly go to GMH to provide that support. So I stand here recognizing that this body has continually and will continue to provide the financial resources to GMH when necessary, but we certainly also want to ensure that some of the tools that are in place are effectively utilized and that perhaps we don't have to come back to this table recognizing that there's an emergent situation when there are already tools and resources applicable and provided in the budget that would allow for supporting GMH so that healthcare is not an issue as it comes to that institution providing services to our people. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion? Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment, not without reservation, but certainly knowing what GMH needs. But I think we also need to point out, the tone of the letter that the governor sent us, and that, unless we that the lack of approving this amendment, which is an after-the-fact amendment, that we're endangering the lives of Guamanians, that we're risking their lives because we didn't do something that we didn't need to do, and we didn't find out we needed to do until 2 days ago. That's the problem. So now he's saying, because we told you yesterday that you needed to do this, and you didn't do it yesterday, you have risked the lives of all these people at GMH. I just think that's a little over the top. I think the governor's turning into a drama queen here with regards to the way he's trying to frame this charge of what we have. How could we do something that we were not told we needed to be done until 2-3 days ago? So it's totally unfair on the governor to do so. What is fair, Madam Speaker, is what has the governor done to assist GMH? If you recall, Madam Speaker, we were in the middle of a budget, and my colleagues in here, along with the governor, said, you got to suspend discussion on the budget because we got to address the GMH issue. If you remember, my colleagues down in this body said, we can't do the budget unless we do something for GMH. And what did we do? We slowed down the process. We looked at what we could do for GMH, where there might be available resources to assist GMH, structured the budget and the authorities in the budget to give the greatest flexibility possible for the governor to transfer monies to assist GMH with the authorities vested and granted to him in the FY 2014 budget. We allowed the governor to transfer up to $33 million in resources that had not been appropriated, that had been reserved, that had been sequestered and encumbered by the governor through administrative authority, and said, all of that money you didn't spend there, you can take and use to assist GMH. How much money has the governor given GMH under those authority to assist GMH? Zero. The governor has not used any and not transferred any single dollar to GMH from that authority of over $33 million that was given to him in the budget. Instead, what the governor did was, in addition to those authorities and those additional resources given to the governor, we, of course, made an FY 2000 appropriation to GMH for its operations for FY 2014, and we increased that appropriation. We had the pharmaceutical fund. We had, of course, the straight-out appropriation for the loan subsidy, plus other appropriations to GMH, and we increased the FY 2014 subsidy to GMH. And what did the governor do? He took the FY 2014 for this fiscal year, which GMH needs, and he took $3.6 million of FY 2014 appropriation that is vitally needed by GMH for this year's operational shortfall, and he paid 2013 expenses. Instead of using the other authority contained in $33 million that was given to him to cover those expenses, he took GMH's own money, gave it back to GMH and said, here. And he hasn't resolved the issue. What's going to happen at the end of this fiscal year when that $3.6 million that has been programmed by GMH based upon the budget for this fiscal year, when it's not there? And it's not going to be there unless the governor replenishes it. But he's not doing anything like that. If anybody's endangering the lives, it's the governor that's guilty of doing that, because he has not done nothing to increase the resources at GMH over and beyond what this legislature has granted him to. And when he has done so in giving them the money, he's taking it from their own appropriation and their own allocation that they already have budgeted out for this fiscal year. So they're going to be short this fiscal year because he's taken that money and he gave it to them for 2013. That's the truth. That's the whole truth of this matter. Not the fact that the legislature is endangering lives because we didn't do something that we didn't find out we needed to do until 2 days ago, Madam Speaker. So I asked the governor, the governor will come out and say, oh, let's all get together. Man, everybody just criticize this, criticize that. No. The only thing I'm doing, Madam Speaker, I'm just telling the truth. And if the truth hurts, then so be it. But the governor likes to say that. He wants to be a nice guy, and then on the other hand, he wants to say you're going to kill people. Well, we're trying. We gave you the authority. We gave you the flexibility that we haven't given any other governor, Madam Speaker, any other governor. He had $22 million in surplus, Madam Speaker. And what did he do? Did he take any of that surplus and give it to GMH? No. He just ignored GMH. He took all the surplus and he allocated it to what he wanted. He could have very well, Madam Speaker, taken a portion of that surplus and paid off some of GMH's bill, and then, like he said, ask for a reimbursement or allow transfer authority. He can even do that just by transfer. But when he found out he had this whole surplus, his first priority was not, how can I help GMH? It's, how can I reassure that I dole this out that gives me the most political gain? Not what is going to be best for the people of Guam, but what is going to give me and solidify my political base. Madam Speaker, that's the truth. Because if he had given $22 million in surplus to GMH, we wouldn't be here. But no, he wanted to pay this, pay that, pay that. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't have. I'm just saying he can't do those things and then say, my God, how come you ignored GMH? I wanted to help GMH. I want to help GMH. I'm going to call you in the special session to help GMH. Governor, you didn't have to. You still have $33 million in authority to help GMH. And you just chose not to. Consciously and purely for purposes of advancing just political objectives versus meeting the needs. We could have gone with a contract on health insurance that would have saved us $20 million. Us, the people of Guam, the employees of the government of Guam, and taken that savings and given it to GMH. The governor decided, I'm not going to do that. That's not my priority. My priority is to ensure that I get these insurance companies in. That was that priority. How are we endangering it when he had 20 million and the choice he made was not to give it to GMH? Not even another penny. It was to give it to the insurance company to make sure that they continued to participate. That's the truth, Madam Speaker. And the governor, I'm sure, will send out a press release that says, that's not the truth. Stop criticizing us when we try to do something good. I will. I will when it's cloth in the truth. But it's not cloth in the truth, Madam Speaker. Again, Madam Speaker, when we ask these questions, I'm a little concerned about the fact that we are waiving this sovereign immunity and adding and being specific of attorney's fees and related costs after the pact. Madam Speaker, I kind of in jest said, well, you know, when these companies bid on a government project, they kind of say, I'm going to get paid 60 days instead of 45, so my price instead of 42 cents per unit, my price is going to be 44 cents per unit. If I could be paid in 30 days, it'll be 40 cents per unit instead of 43 cents per unit. So they priced the risk, they priced collection, they priced everything else. If I need to sue, this is how much it's going to cost me, so I'm going to have half a penny per unit of the lending per thousand, half a penny tacked on per thousand, so that if I have to sue, I have the money to sue to do so and not have to take it out of my own pocket. So I'm saying, we're making this change after the fact. I was almost saying, hey, bank, I'm sure you priced that in. We're dealing with a fairly sophisticated operation at the bank here, and knowing who's at the head, she has certainly eclipsed everything she's been able to do in this legislature with her understanding and success in managing financing and ensuring profit, which is a good thing because she's a very generous benefactor to this community. And so a lot of that profit goes right back into our people. But if we did this and you're not on the hook for attorney's fees anymore, can we get like a 25 basis points or 250 basis points reduction in our interest rate? Maybe we can negotiate that later on for the concession that we're giving up today. Maybe that's something the government should think about. But again, Madam Speaker, we're kind of doing things after the fact, and it's a little, that's why we wanted to ensure that we had a public hearing so we can air all of these things out, so we can actually discuss them, so we can ask the other banks, hey, other banks who did not bid on this, if we had put in the RFP, in the original RFP, that you will be able to sue the government of Guam for default, you will also be able to recover attorney's fees, and you will be able to recover other related fees. Would you have bid on this thing if you had known that at the very front? Because it wasn't part of the IFB. It wasn't part of the original. And we might have gotten a more competitive environment for these loans. Now, our lender who has come to the table, and I must say that this lender has been at the table when nobody else wanted to come to the table. So we are eternally recognize their good heart, their corporate citizenry, but also their business acumen. Because by managing their business well, they have come to the aid of this government when no other financial institution would have, and we thank them for that. But it is our job on this side of the fence as government officials and public leaders to ensure that when we spend public funds, that we maximize the opportunity for competition, maximize the opportunity for getting the best bang for the dollar that we can. And so while we may have all of these other relationships, our primary duty here is to protect the public interest and protect the public dollar. And anything that we can do to advance competition that gives us the biggest bang for our dollar is a good thing. And I'm sure everybody understands that, both on the government side and on the private sector side. And so, Madam Speaker, once again, I rise in support of this legislation. I wish that we could have negotiated something else. And maybe there's still an opportunity if it hasn't closed. Now that we are making concessions on the part of the government, maybe the government can go back and say, look, we've made these concessions. I'm sure you've priced that risk in there. This risk is no longer going to be an economic drain on you should you have to enforce it because you're able to recoup it. Is there a consideration we can get for that? Because we are giving you this consideration. And I urge the government, the governor, Gita, to have these kind of discussions. And don't let them say, hey, you can't do that because we already did everything, that we already agreed to the terms. Well, we also agreed in the bid, and now they're asking us to make a concession. If we can, hopefully they will too, and we'll consider it as well, Madam Speaker. But I go back to this charge by the governor, that, my gosh, this legislature, it can't seem to act on anything that is important to our people and our territory, and that they just continue to not want to do anything. Madam Speaker, we had scheduled a public hearing for all the 3 bills related to government loans for Guam Memorial Hospital, the legislature, restoration of the old Congress building, and of course, the Guam Memorial Hospital and the Port Authority of Guam. That we had, once the bills were introduced and we were informed that that's what we needed to do by legislation, the bills were introduced, we scheduled a public hearing. It was supposed to be for this Friday. That would have met the deadlines that we were told were contingent on us acting to ensure that GMH is not placed at risk, nor the ability for GMH to continue to meet its obligations placed at risk. And we were methodically moving through that process, and then the governor comes and says, my God, you're not acting fast enough. Madam Speaker, and that because you're not acting fast enough, you're risking lives. Well, the governor, you did not act fast enough. You had an opportunity, you had the authority, you had the resources to give additional resources to GMH, and you chose not to do so. You chose that the only way they're going to do it is to go get a loan. The governor's fascinated with loans. Every solution to every crisis, there's a solution, and the solution is a loan. Why couldn't we just give GMH a portion of that surplus, not have to take out a loan? GMH doesn't have to take its operational revenues and pay off a loan, because we would have paid it off with a surplus, and that money that would have gone for a loan payment is now available for regular operational expenses of GMH. That would have been a better way to help GMH. But no, I've never met a loan I don't like. That's the governor's motto, And let's do another one, Madam Speaker. I think in this case, we will move forward on this. We will support GMH in its efforts. We'll continue to work with them. But I think the governor's tone of this letter and his charges in this letter completely uncalled for and completely unfounded. Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. Senator Nicholas, on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd first like to thank the governor for calling us into special session. It's been a while since I've been on the floor, and I've forgotten just how much I enjoy being in this room, and I'm glad that we're here today. In the governor's letter, he opens up with this sentence, and he says, "True leadership is about answering the call to help our most vulnerable." And when I reflect on that sentence, a couple of things become very, very clear to me about the governor's mentality. One of them is that he views the vulnerabilities of our community as a foregone conclusion. And that's sad, because our community should be less and less vulnerable as we do more and more of our job. And then he also views us answering their call as being true leadership. which insinuates that we have to sit back and wait for them to actually call before we get up and do something. And that is just something that I don't prescribe to. I believe that responsible leadership is about getting ahead of the issues, about us making sure that we're taking the necessary steps that we have to take so that there's less vulnerabilities in our community, so that we're not operating under a condition of crisis every single time something comes up that we need to respond to. True leadership involves answering the call when our most vulnerable call out to us. But responsible leadership is making sure there's less and less vulnerabilities every day we come to work. And not just waiting for them to call, but getting ahead of it and taking action. And in that spirit, Madam Speaker, since I think March of last year, I've been asking the hospital, how much money do we need to bring in terms of revenue in order for us to be at a break-even environment under the current operating scenario? And then I've also been asking the hospital, when this new hospital opens up, which I pass by every day when I drop my little girl off to her school, when this new hospital opens up, what's going to be our break-even situation at that point? And I would like to ask the governor to not wait for true leadership again, where our community is vulnerable because this new hospital opened up and our hospital is struggling for money, and then this hospital is calling for more support, and true leadership rides in with the rescue to the crisis, which perhaps may be another loan, as the retiring speaker insinuated. I'd like to ask for responsible leadership for a change. Let's get the same kind of pressure that we get on these crisis situations to actually get us to be a little bit more proactive and to get these numbers from the hospitals that we know what we need to break even under the current environment, what we need to break even in the event that this hospital opens up and it sucks money out of GMH, which all of us deep down are very much afraid of. Let's get in front of it for a change so that we're not always operating under the gun. And that, Madam Speaker, leads me to this bill. We got to do what we got to do. But this bill is a sign of the times. This bill, in a nutshell, is the lender coming to the government and saying, you got to put language in there that says that if we sue you, you're going to pay our attorney's costs. What does that mean exactly? It means that the lender's worried that they're going to take us to court. And what does that mean when we dig deeper? It means that the lender is concerned about this bad faith environment that is very, very obvious in so many different dealings of this government, at least since I've been here for the last year. Just recently, Madam Speaker, of this Cortec deal, where we have the smartest real estate developer on the island coming out and questioning it, and one of our most prestigious real estate appraisers coming out and questioning it, and so many of members of our community coming out and questioning it, it's no wonder the lender is going to want us to be able to pay their attorney's costs in the event that we move forward with this loan. $160 million. And there's so many questions, and it just doesn't smell right anymore. The whole environment just doesn't feel right. We have a multinational corporation in duty-free that are going through their own litigious process because they were not satisfied with the way the procurement issues were resolved with respect to the concessionaire contract up at the airport. And even the public auditor in a public hearing recently said, for the first time since she's been a public auditor, and as far as she could remember in her career as a public servant, our government has taken up the practice of not seeing procurement disputes resolved from beginning to end. And instead, they're just jumping the gun, coming to a conclusion, issuing out the contract, and putting us deeper and deeper into a situation that we're going to have a harder and harder time climbing out of. That is a sign of the times, Madam Speaker, when we have these kind of situations piling up to the point where even a lender has to say, you know what, I want you to pay my attorney costs in case anything else blows up. This is where we are right now, Madam Speaker. I guess this is true leadership. And so I would like for the hospital, this perhaps maybe the 8th time I'm bringing this issue up, I would like for the hospital to help us get ahead of this issue and not wait for us to constantly be under the gun, and to let us know how much we're going to need to break even in the current operating environment, how much we're going to need to break even when that new hospital opens up and provides so much competition for paying customers and takes away even more customers of insurance to the point where GMH is left basically handling mostly indigent cases. What's the worst case scenario? What are we going to have to anticipate in the future, and what are we going to have to deal with? Let's get those responsible questions answered so that we're not operating under this constant crisis environment that is now being called true leadership. And while we're at it, let's kind of change this idea of what the governor is defining as true leadership into responsible leadership, where we are no longer putting ourselves into this kind of operating environment where even lenders need to ask us to pay their attorney's costs. Because we have a $160 million deal up at Teason that everybody's questioning. We have a multi-million dollar deal up at the airport that was questioned. We even have issues of our health insurance that came up and were questioned. And we're not talking about small questions. We're talking about questions in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. This is not an environment within which we should be operating if we truly want to grow Guam. Because nobody's going to want to do business in an environment where we've got to constantly come down to the legislature and say, hey, by the way, can you pay my lawyer's fees? What kind of company is going to want to come here and do business in that environment? But that's the environment that we have. Obviously, if this is something that we need to do in legislation, so let's step back, Madam Speaker. Let's drop all of this rhetoric, and let's evaluate the situations for what they are. And let's evaluate this kind of legislation for what it truly represents. An environment wherein which everybody is so concerned about having to make sure their lawyer bills are going to get paid, because I might just have to take you to court because so many things have been happening that don't smell right, and I don't want to have to be caught with my pants down. That's not the kind of Guam that the people of Guam deserve. It's not the kind of Guam that's going to build a good future for my kids. It's not the kind of Guam that's going to attract new businesses and more investment. It's the kind of Guam where if you are able to get your way now, you're good to go. And everybody else, you better watch out. You better make sure that you are able to somehow get things like this written into your legislation, because otherwise, something might get signed, a deal might get made, you might get left out, and too bad. That is not good for Guam. It's not good for our future. And that's what this bill represents. And while we as a legislature are going to do everything we can to make sure the hospital gets the help that the hospital needs, it doesn't mean that we are abandoning our call for them to give us the information that we need to make responsible choices. And it doesn't mean that we are neglecting or in any way acknowledging that this current environment is okay. It is not okay. It needs to change. And this kind of legislation should be something that is a thing of the past if we're truly going to be doing what's right for our people and building a responsible Guam. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Dueñas.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to rise in full support of Bill 250-32 COR. Would like to take this opportunity to thank the author and the chairman on health and the majority leader who has joined on this legislation and the offer to co-sponsor myself on this very needed piece of legislation. Happy New Year, Madam Speaker, and the rest of the body and the people of Guam. Unfortunately, I guess, at least from my perspective, not much is new from what I've been hearing. Madam Speaker, I was privileged to an email chain last week where a request was sent to this body to entertain session for the very matter that is before us today. We did not do that, and here we are today. Madam Speaker, I'm reminded with the actions of the governor of the saying that I was taught as a young man, no good deed goes unpunished. Regardless of the effort to address what the lender and the environment and the attorney general and opinions and a reversal has asked for. Not the governor, Not even us. I hear the term after the fact. There are many after the facts, Madam Speaker, in the legislative process. This after the fact isn't necessarily born upon the so-called discussion of environment. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, there are companion bills to this bill that require the same thing. The Port Authority, in my opinion, probably rises to the level that this GMH bill rises to. Certainly, the new legislature might not, which requires this provision. Perhaps we have the time in this upcoming session to deal with that. Madam Speaker, there is a letter provided by the Guam Memorial Hospital, whose representatives are spending their valuable time here today, that was sent to the governor detailing the need and the emergent situation that exists. Now, I am not one to ever and will never be one to abrogate the responsibility as an elected official to this body. But I will not, and I'll take deference to mentions on the floor, that inaction is to be accepted, because it was clearly a request by the good chairman to have us in this house deal with this. I hear rise of support. And then I'll allow the administration to take on the veracity of all the other statements that have been made, from airport loans to what have you. I am here to make my comments on this very, very needed and vital piece of legislation. And I would envision that for those of us who may have taken offense to what was the obvious being stated here, perhaps because of our threshold and our requirement, which is only true and right, to have an emergency to call into session for the chief of the executive to see it that way at the request of GMH, at the inaction, in order to act. Madam Speaker, I go around and I speak to people on a daily basis, and this was brought up by a colleague on the floor. The new hospital. They can't wait for the new hospital to be open. When they take their loved ones up there, and they're doing the best they can with what they got up there. But when they're bursting at the seams up there, and people are jumping on airplanes as fast as they can, but they do, on the second half of that statement, address a point that was made on this floor. What will happen to our hospital? And we all have that concern. Yet here we stand today with an opportunity to show our commitment. Our commitment. The first step in showing and validating that we truly do care. This body cares. We will give you the authority to get out there and get that loan. The fascination of financing, combined with the fact that we stopped the budget process, Madam Speaker, in the last budget, to pat ourselves on the back because it was the right thing to do to make sure GMH has what it needed to have. And once again, with the transfers of monies, I'll allow those people to address the veracity of those statements. But as a matter of fact, and as I move to a close, the issue of the borrowing component that the financial people and everybody else at GMH has said is a piece to the whole effort with regard to managing their finances is a critical tool. They need this. And they need it yesterday. Because from what I understand from the chairman as a co-sponsor, there's 2 more steps after this. And to go to market to realize this funding by February, early February, when they need this money, those are the facts as stated, Madam Speaker, from these true professionals who have come and asked for our assistance. I cannot believe, and I'll state it myself, I guess, to join the chorus. The governor, the governor, the governor. Is this about the governor? Or is this about the people? Is this about a financing mechanism, one of multi pieces that are being put together to do our job? Or about the governor? I close, Madam Speaker, by asking us to, as was spoken about earlier, ratchet down the rhetoric. When we rise in support, let's show our support for the true individuals that are asking for it. And those are those who expect us to move expediently as a full-time legislature to get the work done and do the people's work. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator Dueñas. Speaker Wampat, you're recognized on the main motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, I was going to talk about the letter, but I think what I need to talk about too, because I take difference as well, when a colleague here has accused, in particular me, for not taking any action or any inaction by this body, because it would be me who would call the special session other than the governor. And I take offense, of course, to the governor's letter and the tone of his letter when he talks about true leadership, as if though he's the only leader in this community. But what bothers me, of course, is when people start to talk and don't even know the whole story. So I'll tell you the story. I, yes, received a phone call from the chairperson to consider calling for a special session. And I asked for more information because I had just returned from a trip. The email was sent to me days later, the letter from Mr. Berga. And then, of course, the date, a drop date of January 22nd, in the hopes, of course, of passing 250 before that deadline so that payments can be made. And this is not the only time in which any special session has been requested of me without me referring all of the time to the oversight chair. And the very first thing on that very day, I had approached then Speaker Pangilinan, who those 3 bills were referred to, bill number 250 in particular. And he had asked if there are any other dates available, which normally is assigned by COR to the different chairpersons to have public hearings. And unfortunately, Speaker Pangilinan didn't have a date for this week, so I've offered the date of my hearing on the 16th. Unfortunately, it would not meet the deadline of the 5-day notice required by law. So the next individual who offered his date was on the 17th, which is the majority leader. And I called the chairperson, Senator Rodriguez, and told him this, that this was an important bill, yes, to have a public hearing. And it was requested by the oversight to have the public hearing. And immediately, because of the time frame, I had asked Speaker Pangilinan that when he has the public hearing that morning, that afternoon, I would like for him to report the bill out because I'm calling session. So letters went out to both chairs that I will be calling session because of the importance of it, and not on the date in which it was due, but dates ahead of that time. And based on the letters and other documents that I've read, is that everyone was doing their part in terms of getting the loan, getting the language in, having the public hearing, and having a session, and then, of course, passing the bill and sending it to the governor's office. Because no matter how important it is, we always, and I say always, that the staff know that they would personally hand carry the bill to the governor, whether it be in his office or in his private residence. Because if it was that important, then the governor already would have had his people there ready to sign the bill. So before we start going and throwing stones at people and talk about the inaction of this legislature, my practice have not changed at all, and it has not. I've always taken into consideration the oversight chair, and yes, even the individual, the senator, asking for a special session. So I take offense to that, and I wish people would ask first before they even talk about it and accuse me, even though they're not mentioning any names. And it's not because I didn't want a closed session, because maybe I didn't support it. That's not even the case at all. Because it always has been and always will be the priority of this legislature, and we've made that a policy of this legislature many sessions ago, that it will be health, education, and public safety over anything else. So no one can ever accuse this legislature, and I've been here longer than most of you, except maybe for one or two, that has always been the position of this legislature. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Speaker Wampat. On the main motion, do we have any speakers? Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this bill, 1-6S. Certainly, I want to say that this is a huge opportunity to do whatever it is necessarily, statutorily, to provide the loan that was previously authorized by the Guam Memorial Hospital that this legislature certainly supported. Madam Speaker, I want to echo your sentiments to say that really it is a new year, and maybe what I'm hearing is a resounding appeal to the governor that when he presents these issues to the legislature and to the people, that he presents it in a dispassionate kind of way where it doesn't pit one up against the other, where it doesn't come across as offending, where it doesn't require certain members of this body to be defensive. Madam Speaker, when the Oversight Chair for Health asked me to co-sponsor this bill on January 3rd of this year, I certainly didn't have a problem with it because I was very familiar with what's been happening with the legislature's loan to restore the old legislature building to its former glory. And so I'm also aware of what's been happening to the loan that's before the Port Authority of Guam. And so what Senator Rodriguez did is he reached out to us in our oversight capacities and asked if we would be a part of this effort to find a statutory mechanism to move these three loans forward. And I want to say, too, that you've certainly been very open to allowing all 15 of us, yourself certainly included, the wherewithal to do whatever it is necessary to bring those issues to which we are very passionate about. And I know that when the oversight chair of the Guam Memorial Hospital asked you to have a session, it was really because there was some messages that we were hearing that the governor was going to call us to a special session anyway, and so it was an opportunity to really let you know what the administration was planning on doing, and I commend all those involved for bringing that issue forward. And so, like you said, when you reached out to the oversight chair of appropriations, who this bill was referred to, you know, it's not just a matter of introducing a bill today, bringing it to the floor the same day or even the next day. There's a lot of background work that goes with every bill that's introduced before this body so that we could be a deliberative body and do the necessary legislative research so that there's no unintended consequences. I submit to you, Madam Speaker, that when this bill was introduced on January 3rd, the remedy to this situation was just not thought of on January 3rd. I submit to you, because I was privy to the back and forth between the Attorney General's office, the Guam Economic Development Authority, and the Bank of Guam in this case, on all the back and forth that has been put and the energy that has been put into this issue. In our case, in the legislature's case, I believe we passed that bill to do that loan sometime in August or September. So you had September, October, November, December, all of 4 months to try to figure out what is it that would be satisfactory to all parties involved. And so we're at this juncture now where the administration was aware, because we're very transparent, that there was a public hearing that was scheduled for the 17th of this month. You committed publicly to calling us into session right away on that same day to address these three issues in a regular session, which would have given us an opportunity to address other appointments to boards and commissions that are also pending. I submit to you, Madam Speaker and colleagues, that we are a co-equal branch of government. And it is a new year. I'm all about a fresh start. I'm all about a clean slate. And when we look at how the governor calls us into special session, it seems like old habits die hard, and he's going to continue to go through every single bill that's been introduced. And if for some reason he feels that that bill should take priority over other bills that are before this body, he's going to call us into special session. He's going to name the bill by name and just leave it at that. In my experience, Madam Speaker, with previous administrations, they were very respectful of the legislature as a co-equal branch of government. They were even very respectful of the judiciary as a co-equal branch of government. But we have a situation where I don't think the manner in which this body is called to action by implying that we're not acting the way we should be acting in an expeditious manner is really creating some kind of crisis in our community, where it looks like the legislature sat on this whole issue, and it looks like now Guam Memorial Hospital is going to be is not going to be able to heal the sick Guamanians that it treats. And so I guess I'm just echoing the sentiments, and our actions certainly will speak louder than words, and I'm not hearing any opposition to this piece of legislation. So all this heightened drama about we got to act today, and all this messaging that the legislature is not going to be supportive of Senator Rodriguez's bill, I don't know where that's coming from, Madam Speaker, but I certainly want to thank the Oversight Chair. I want to thank you and all of our colleagues for bringing out what exactly it is that we're doing in Bill 250-32, and seriously the unintended consequences by not only waiving sovereign immunity, but by allowing for attorney fees and other matters to be attached to that. And prior to the amendment that was offered by the author of this bill, certainly someone can make the reasonable conclusion that we would have subjected this government to an open-ended claim against it. And I think that's also our responsibility. Our responsibility is to provide that kind of balance, to make sure that in all that we do, we don't create this unintended consequences. And these things would not have been flushed out if it weren't for the past 4 months between the administration, GITA, the Attorney General's office, and if it weren't for the diligent work of our Oversight Chair for Appropriations to really analyze these things. And that's what we all do here, Madam Speaker. None of us are jurisdictional experts, but we certainly know how to reach out to those individuals to kind of help give us the guidance that we need. And so I rise in support of the bill. I'm asking that going forward, that the administration really provide a dispassionate approach when ever he feels that the legislature should be paying extra attention to those areas which he believes we're not, and give us an opportunity to act as we always have, Madam Speaker, under this legislative body where collegiality and the rule of law is what dictates us every single day we come to work. I'm asking that we still operate in that spirit of cooperation, and that's how we would move forward in the coming year. So I thank you for the opportunity to not only express my support for the bill, but just to kind of back you up a little bit in terms of why is it and how is it that you responded to the call for a special session when you had already got all these commitments and you publicly committed to having a session after our public hearing, and what's wrong with having a public hearing. And ultimately, that's been the criticisms of some of our colleagues in some cases, where a bill should have a public hearing, and in other cases like this, there seems to be no real support for a public hearing, and there seems to be no real support for the ideals of transparency and accountability. And at the end of the day, on January 17th, you would have called us into session. The legislature would have acted on that bill, and if there was a majority of us that voted for that bill, then certainly it would have been transmitted immediately, and the hospital would have been able to close on this loan by January 22nd. And so again, Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity, and I certainly thank you for your leadership.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, is there anyone else who would like to speak? There being none, so Senator Rodriguez, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, Seduce State, to all our colleagues here for the statements that were made. And, I'm not going to stand here and add to any more of these. I think enough has been said. The fact here is that once we've passed this legislation and it's signed into law, I have the assurances that the funds would be ready this week, and the hospital could go ahead and pay off what it needs to pay. I think also what needs to be said here, Madam Speaker, is that when we entertain this amendment, we have to, number one, realize, like I said earlier, we've already waived sovereign immunity, in the previous authorization. All we're doing here is being specific because a reversal of a interpretation. But I think also what's very important to note, Madam Speaker, is that in the history, I know I'm much young, I can't say history, but for others, I know that you would know the history of the government of Guam. We've never defaulted in any of our obligations. And I think it's, as leaders here, it's our responsibility to make sure that we don't ever default in any of these obligations. And so these things only kick in if we default in this obligation, which I know for a fact that none of us here in this hall would ever make that happen. So again, I thank you. I thank our colleagues. I thank the governor again for calling us into session to deal with this. And I, once again, ask our colleagues to support this measure. Seduce Masi.
You're welcome. So on the motion then to send Bill 1-6S to the voting file. Any objections? No objections to order. We're going to take a brief recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator Respicio, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe that the bill's been engrossed and that copies have been made and distributed, and I believe now we're ready to proceed to the voting file. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the clerk please read the title?
Bill number 16-S as amended on the floor, introduced by Dennis G. Rodriguez Jr., R.J. Respicio, Christopher M. Duenas. An act to amend Section 80109 S9 of Chapter 80, Division 4 of Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the waiver of sovereign immunity on a loan previously authorized for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority.
Roll call.
Senator Tom Ada. Senator Tom Ada, aye. Senator Tony Ada. Yes. Senator Tony Ada, aye. Senator Uggan. Yes. Senator Uggan, aye. Vice Speaker Cruz. Vice Speaker Cruz, excused. Senator Duenas. Senator Duenas, aye. Senator Lim Tiaco. Aye. Senator Lim Tiaco, aye. Senator McCready. Yes. Senator McCready, aye. Senator Morrison. Aye. Senator Morrison, aye. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Munya Barnes, aye. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Pangilinan, aye. Senator Respicio. Senator Respicio, aye. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Nicolas, pass. Speaker Wampat.
Good.
Speaker Wampat, aye. Senator Yamashita. Yes. Senator Yamashita, aye. Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Nicolas, pass. Senator San Nicolas? No. Senator San Nicolas, nay.
Bill number 16-S received 13 yea votes, 1 nay, and 1 excused. Bill number 16-S is duly passed by this body. Senator Respicio, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that we adjourn this 6th special session synod.
That motion without,
Do you have an announcement? Madam Speaker, before I move that we adjourn this 6th special session synod, I want to thank our oversight chair for military affairs, Senator Uggan, for asking that we make special recognition to all of our troops that are coming home, that have second wave are back, and so we thank God for their return, and we also continue to keep those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in our minds and in our hearts. And with that, and thank you, Senator Uggan, Madam Speaker. And also, Madam Speaker, that we continue to recognize the state of mourning our island is in with the passing of General Ben Blas, Congressman Ben Blas, and our hearts and our prayers continue to go out to his family, and we do whatever we can to honor and respect his memory as well, and his contributions to the people of Guam. So with that, colleagues, I now make my motion that we adjourn this 6th special session synod.
that motion without any objections, so ordered.